Hey, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. I'm continuing with our pandemic projects, and today we're going to work on a Penn Conflict. It's a Conflict 6000, CFT 6000. This one was brought into me, dropped off at the shop, and it's in nice condition. We previewed this one as part of our pandemic project videos earlier. I take this one apart. This one seems in very nice condition. It's a reel that was first introduced in 2015. It was a reel that was discontinued in 2019. And I'm looking here, this Effinger is a local sporting goods store. And that local sporting goods store went out of business in September of 2016. So that's kind of a good dating in terms of where this is. And it also said the original pricing on this was $149.99. So that's a lot of information about the reel. And it's a nice reel. It's one up on the Battle. The Battle was, so it went Pursuit, Fierce, Battle, and then it went on to the Conflict and Conquest series, kind of a deal. It's got the HT100 drag system in it. It's a nice size reel. We're going to take you apart. We're going to show you what it's made of, show you how to service this if you have one, and if you're in the market for one, buying it used perhaps, you'll see the technologies behind it. So a couple of things before we get too far down the line. One of the things I always recommend is to wear a protective glove. That protective glove is there to keep the greases and dirt and who knows what off my hands. Just cleaning out a bucket here. I also recommend getting a schematic. In this case, I'm going to use the schematic that was in the box if I get into any trouble. And I always like to look at the schematics before I take a reel apart, just to kind of give me a mental picture of what's going on there. And this is a pretty straightforward design. It uses the traditional circle crosswind gear and the crosswind block that travels up on it, the pinion gear, anti-reverse clutch, and so on. But we'll show you that as we take that apart and deal with it. And we'll have this in reserve in case something goes terribly wrong where I can't identify a piece or a part or whatever. All right, we start by removing the external pieces. Sometimes I take the handle off, sometimes the spool. So here we go. We'll take the spool off. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to take the time to thank the first responders who were involved in helping us stay safe and bringing us back to health in the during this pandemic. We really do appreciate all of the efforts that you put forth, and we really do need to thank you and hope that you keep safe as you're trying to keep us safe, and that we appreciate you, everything you're doing in terms of healing the folks that have come down with this horrible virus. So with that, we're going to start taking away the handle. And then we'll remove the side plate, because you can't take the shaft off here without taking the side plate off first. And the first process of the side plate is to remove that bump guard. And if I remember, there's a screw hiding under the bump guard as well. And that's there to protect the case. So if you wrap a pole, if you wrap a gun wall on a boat or something, you're going to break the side plate. You're not going to break the reel. Right, there is no spool. Sometimes they had a screw there. Now, these are the screws that can be either flat-bladed screws, or they can be Phillips head. You can use either one as the drive. I think it's a I seem to do better with the flat blade. I think this might actually be some kind of a tooling that's used that has a different bit to it, and I believe you can actually get the bits. I don't remember the name of it, but in this case, if you can do it manually with the regular screwdriver, just go ahead and do that. And sometimes when to loosen the Phillips head, just helps to grab it a little bit better and take it out. But I worry about butterflying the grooves if I start with that Phillips head. So I go for the solid flat-bladed screwdriver first. All right, I'm putting the pieces and parts into a parts tray. That helps me know where that piece is going to be when I go to reinstall the reel. There's a lot of different systems folks use. Some folks like to line the pieces and parts up in a row as they take them off. Whatever works for you. This one, this little parts tray, which is nothing more than the bottom of a milk jug, has served me for quite a few years now. It's kind of my system, if you will, so I go with that. There's little plastic washers on the bottom of these screws, and that's kind of what's holding that one in. But right now we should be able to remove the side plate. Sometimes you need a little wedge to do that. There you go. I'm just going to use a flat blade from a utility knife, and that's why I guess I couldn't pull that one out. There's one or two more turns left in that one. And then I'm just going to flip that so I can grab this. So this still has the original grease in it. You can tell it's the Penn Precision Reel Grease. They overload the reels when they take them from the factory. They don't want it failing during the warranty. But the problem with a lot of this is that it just grabs a lot of contaminations over time. It's sort of like motor oil. After a while it needs to be changed. You don't have to wait for the motor to break to tell you that. I took the bearing off. It looks like a sealed bearing. Can't pull the main gear because the axle shaft is in the way, so you have to remove the axle shaft. You're going to do that next. There's two connecting screws in that crosswind block. I'm just going to lay them on the table for a moment, and then once I remove those two pieces, we'll clean them up and we'll put them into the parts tray. Alright, those two go in. Now I can remove the axle shaft simply by pulling up. I'm going to grab a paper towel to clean off the excess there. Now if you notice that there was any pitting or really dried grease on this, then go ahead and use something a little more aggressive. You could use a kitchen scrubby pad. You can use 4/0 steel wool, but right now that one looks just fine. I'm going to put that into the bucket and just clean the grease off that bearing. Alright, now we can pull the main gear out, and you can just see when it comes from the factory, just overload. And what happens with overloading is it just accumulates. This is not doing anybody any good, and if it's carrying dirt in there, well then that dirt is going to just act as an abrasive, and it's just going to start chewing away at the metal pieces and parts. So we're going to get that old grease off of there. And you can tell it all got pressed out of the teeth. The teeth are pretty much just clean right now. All of it just got pushed to the side. And then we'll go ahead and do the same thing. I'm using cotton swabs to get this stuff out. And we'll just keep pulling it out until we get it reasonably clean there. And again, that's just an overload at this point. And that overload hasn't done anything. There's nothing at all to go lubricate in here. There's no moving parts. So some folks like to overload reels to keep the water out, and especially if you're surf casting. I would tell you that's fine. I don't like to do it. I don't do it personally. But if you're going to do it, just like changing engine oil, you better be very much on schedule, and don't let it go more than a year, because the salts and the sand and the grease and the grime and all the other stuff that happens with these reels, if you let that just nest in there, it's just going to become more of a problem. Alright, the main gear is clear. It's back in the parts tray then. Do the same thing with that bearing. Actually, I'm going to put that bearing onto the main gear. That way I don't confuse it with the other bearings that are in the reel. Alright, next up then we have a crosswind block here. Let's go ahead and take that off. It's a good time to tell you, take pictures. Now this one's a little hard to confuse in terms of the orientation, but I've seen reels where people have flipped these around the wrong way, and then they come in saying, I don't have the throw, or my reel's not responding properly, or it's not reeling, or whatever. Take pictures along the way so that you know the orientation of that piece when you go to put it back in. Take it with a cell phone camera, take it with a video camera like I'm doing here, take it with a stationary camera. Doesn't matter, just take a picture. If you don't have the schematic, even if you have the schematic and you're just working on the reel for the first time, very easy to confuse orientations. That goes in the parts tray. Next up we have a crosswind gear, and I'm just going to wipe down to make sure that that's just a stud and not a screw there. Sometimes these are screwed in. In this case, that's just sitting on a plastic stud, so I'm going to just grab that crosswind stud with my pliers, pull it out. Like everything else, we've got a bunch of grease on there that's doing no good. It's all chunked in the channel here. And this is where I get concerned. If the grease gets dirty, then you've got stuff in here that's abrasive. Let's say it's micro sand or it's salt that's dried. Well, that's going to work its way to the teeth. And if it works its way to the teeth, then you've got grinding going on, and eventually you're going to wear the teeth down. So we're going to just get that out of here, part of our cleaning. And we'll clean the face of this. And then you're going to check the teeth. You want to make sure that there's no damage. Now, when I was cranking the reel before, it cranked very smoothly, so there's no damage there. If you like, you can take a soft brush, like a toothbrush, and just pull down across just to clear all those channels of the teeth. And then just put that in the part tray as well. Alright, so we're moving along here. We got another bearing in the back here. We got an awful lot of grease inside here. So now's a good time to take the rest of the top of the reel off. And then we can come back and clean that section as well. So we'll start with the hold down screw for the top nut. And that's just to hold the nut from rotating, becoming loose. So a lot of times people will tell me they've got line that looks like it's in a figure eight or it's spooling very odd. And sometimes that's because the rotor is not on tight enough, and so as it wobbles, it becomes a little bit inoperative, if you will, and starts throwing it to one side or the other. Alright, good thing I have a good assortment of tools here, because Penn uses these oddball sizes from time to time. There we go. I like to just crack the nut, and then as we can, work the rest out by hand. That way I don't risk stripping anything if something gets caught on the opposite side, and then we should be just able to pull it off, which we did. Here's our underneath mechanism. We got grease everywhere. This is kind of interesting, but that's okay. It's not dirty, at least as best I can tell it's not dirty, so let's just clean that out of there. Not doing any good, just keeping the case lubricated, but that's alright. We'll put a drop of oil onto your bail lever trip. While I'm at it, I'm going to put a drop of oil onto the roller bearing, drop of oil into the side pieces of the bail, and we're just going to let that sit. Alright, this is a good time to take a picture, because this is your anti-reverse setup here. There's an anti-reverse clutch, but there's also a little lock in here. These two teeth will intersect the ripples in here, kind of a double stop. So let's pull this off then. That's riding on a little eccentric. Pay attention to the spring that's going on there. There's a spring with a stud here, and there's a hole in here, and you need to make sure that that spring, stud, and hole all go together. If you don't, this won't work right. So when you go to put it back, you can see on this side, this is the upside down side, but you can see how that goes into the hole there. I'm just going to place that on my table here as opposed to the parts tray, because as soon as we get most of this done, we're going to just put this back together. We're going to remove the pinion, the bearing, and the anti-reverse clutch next. That's held on by 3 machine screws. And what I like to do when I do these, I like to lay these on my table. I just want to make sure that all of the screws are the same size. It's easy to assume that they are, but from time to time you get an oddball screw that is longer or shorter. And if that's the case, then you want to make sure that you identify which location that screw came out of. Again, that's a good reason to have a schematic diagram. It's also a good reason to take pictures, just in case. Right now those 2 screws are the same, and we're going to assume for the most part that this screw is the same as well, but if you don't know, this is a good time to test it. Alright, that's the third one. This whole assembly should pull out now. And let's go do the cleaning first, and then we'll come back and service this assembly. Alright, so I did that because that pinion gear is in the way up here, and there's a lot of grease in this reel, as we mentioned. You can see just how much is kind of accumulated there. And I want to get the stuff out of there so that it has a fresh start. And the best way is not to work around something, but to take it out and just kind of do it this way. I'll wipe it down. And somebody says, why don't you do a complete and utter cleaning of the reel? Why don't you do the ultrasonics and everything? And quite honestly, on a basic service, you want to just take the precautions that you can. If you're going to rebuild the reel, of course, you're going to do ultrasonic cleaning, and you're going to bring it down and check every piece and part, which is kind of what I do here. But I don't worry if I have a light coating of the grease behind there on a reel that hasn't been performing terribly. Alright, but we've done a pretty good job here in terms of getting that clean. There's a whole bunch of grease under here, so let's get that out of the way. And I'm satisfied that we've done well. This is just a little ramp kind of brake thing. You don't need to take that off. I've seen some reel in a bag projects come in where folks take everything off. You don't need to take that off. Okay, a couple of things on orientation then. This is the top. I lay it down so that I identify it as the top. Next up then we have a bearing and a collar. Notice that this bearing has the, this usually has a shiny side and a, well in this case it's sealed on both sides, but there's a double side here that's different. The bearing comes up out of the top and the bottom has a ridge on it. And for whatever reason, sometimes, well, we were talking about orientation before, it doesn't matter which side the bearing goes in terms of up or down, but it does matter in terms of which side the collar goes. And I've seen them come in like this and it hasn't been working, and the answer is that they put it in upside down. Alright, I don't know if this is sealed or just shielded, so I'll put some grease on, some oil on that as well. Same thing with this one now. This is your anti-reverse clutch, and I always get problems with the anti-reverse clutch, or at least questions on the anti-reverse clutch. So let's take a moment here. What you want to do is you want to note the orientation of the sleeve, which is this, and you want to note the orientation of the anti-reverse clutch. This is what I was thinking about before. There's a plastic side to the anti-reverse clutch and there's a chrome side. The chrome side goes up. So here's what happens if it doesn't. And I get questions on this all the time, otherwise I probably wouldn't be doing this at the moment. If you put this backwards, you're going to spin freely, and then you're going to have the wrong rotation. So you'll be able to wind the reel backwards, but you won't be able to wind the reel forward. It's just one of those things. It's a one-way clutch. So you have to make sure that you have that in the right orientation. Alright, well this is what we were getting to, because there's some grease in here and we want to make sure we get that old grease out of there. So I'm going to use that soft brush, clear the channels. If this was dried grease, and I do this a lot on some of these real old reels that you see me from time to time doing, get a pick, get a toothpick. In this case it's a metal pick, and just run it through the channels to make sure that you don't have the greases in there. Okay, well that's easy enough, right? Okay, and then we had a bottom bearing here. Do the same thing again. I don't know if these are shielded or sealed. Shame on me. I'm going to put some oil on there. I'm going to reload that bearing. Then we're going to put our shield on. Then we're going to put our plastic side down. We're going to put a little bearing shield on. Then we're going to take the bearing assembly for the top with the ridge on the bottom. We're going to install that. And then we can put this back into the carrier as soon as we put some grease onto that pinion gear where we cleaned the old grease off. And that'll make sure that the gears mesh and have a nice nice lubrication there. That's the top channel reassembly. Goes like that. Find our piece. Now this one has a flat side here. That flat side goes towards that anti-reverse mechanism. If you put the round side there, your anti-reverse isn't going to work. Alright, and then this is where I left the 3 screws. So let's go ahead and put those in. Those of you that watch my videos know it's time for you to go get a cup of coffee because me and small screws take a while. In this case I got lucky with the first one. Let's see how lucky we get with the others. But me and small pieces don't get together too well. Okay, let's see if we can, we're in a little bit better position here because that little hole, the little ridge on this seems to hold it a little bit as I do that. And while I'm at it, I might as well start the 3rd one. Alright, so relatively simple up top maintenance there. If you find yourself having trouble removing that pinion gear, sometimes there's a buildup of salt and the like in there. Put some WD-40 or another penetrating oil on there, let it sit. Sometimes that will dissolve the salt. It's kind of trapped between that roller clutch and the case. Sometimes it's good if you want, if you're in a case like this, just take it as it is and put it in a bucket of fresh water and let it sit overnight. That works equally well. Okay, let's reset this then. We're going to take the tab of the spring, make sure it gets into the hole here, and we're going to load both of these, try and keep it together so that the slot here and that point match. Then we can set it down. There you go. Alright. And what you'll see on the eccentric is this is how it's going to break and how it's going to send this out to intersect with the ridges on this piece. Alright, we've oiled the roller bearings, the slots on the bail, the trip lever. We can go ahead and put this piece back on. And our nut was in a traditional clockwise tightening. And I like to do this by hand as well. That way you don't cross strip. I like to tighten that as much as I can, then grab, in this case it's good to grab the screw set. Oh, oops. I thought I was more tight than I was. There you go. Now we have that set down. So we can use the screw here. That'll take care of that lockdown there. And that should stop that rotor nut from spinning. Free. Give it a spin. That's working nicely. It's working as well as it can. Okay, another one of those bearings in the back. So we got 3 bearings in there. Now we can go ahead and reinstall. I'm going to take that crosswind block that we cleaned and make sure we get some grease onto the teeth. We can do this dot here and a dot there. You don't have to get it in everything. A little bit onto the back side. You don't need all that stuff that they had on there before. And when you do this, swing the stud for the crosswind block all the way down on the bottom. And then make sure you get a coating of grease onto the face of this, because that's where this crosswind block is going to ride. It'll travel around that. Okay, now we remember how it goes. We cleaned out the grease in that channel, so let's get some grease back into that channel so that the stud flows freely. And let's get enough onto the face there. And you can set that under the hold down here on the stud. And now you can insert your axle shaft. We cleaned this off. It's nice and smooth. Okay, and once again my camera decided to shut off. For those of you that watch me frequently, you'll be happy to know I just ordered a new camera. I'm going to come into the 21st century, I guess. The cameras that I'm using are a little bit dated, but I did get myself one. It's capable of doing everything up to 4D, although I don't believe we'll do 4D videos for this. They just consume a lot of space and take forever to download. But we will have true HD videos, and that should help everybody in terms of clarity, particularly as they're looking at this. But stay tuned for that. That should be in a week or two. I should get that camera, and we should be better off for it. Okay, now I'm tightening down those last ones now that I have them in. And some folks ask about using a mechanical screwdriver there. I don't recommend it. If you do use a mechanical screwdriver, they have a lot of torque, so please be careful with them. And if you do use them, leave the screw short. Don't drive it all the way home with them. Leave it a little bit short. That way you can make the last turn or two by hand, and that way you won't risk fracturing the case or over tightening it. Alright, so let's give it a spin. It's a beautiful functioning wheel, as we mentioned before. We'll put the handle on, clean the grease off the case, and then I'll show you the HT100 drag system up there. Just give it a spin. That's a beautiful reel. Okay, so we have an HT100. I was just checking. This does not have the slammer drag. This has the traditional bottom where you just have the clicker for the anti-reverse. I'm going to just put a drop of oil on there. That'll let you know that the drag is going out. Well, I guess consistent with everything else, we got a load of grease in here. Now these are HT100 drag washers. You can have grease on those. That's fine. And Penn doesn't make a distinction on drag greases. It uses its regular reel grease there. So I'm not going to jump out of my skin and get concerned. Find the tag end of those hold down clips. They are springs. Be careful with them. But there's an open end to them. If you can find them, you're better for it. Then we're just going to remove them. I'm going to take them, place them in the sequence that I remove them. And the interesting thing about this drag setup is the drag washers are actually your eared washers where they fit in the grooves, and your metals are just smooth. We're just trying to get the last one out without damaging them. These are in excellent condition, as I would have expected. And all I want to do is just clean the excess grease out of the channel. And again, Penn has greased these, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use Cal's Universal Drag Grease on these. And we start with a drag washer that sits in the bottom of the assembly. I put a little bit of grease onto there, and then I rub it with my gloved hand to make sure that the grease gets onto that, and then I wipe off any excess. The excess will just squeeze out, and it has no holding power whatsoever, so you don't need to worry about whether you got too much or too little. Next up then, I just want to clean up the silver washer. That's a round one, doesn't fit anywhere. We're going to do that again with this, with the Cal's Universal Grease. And again, you can use your Penn Precision Wheel Grease if you like. Penn does. So if it's good for Penn, it's good for you. I was just checking to see if any of these drag washers were thicker than the others. If you find yourself in a situation with a thicker drag washer, that one belongs on the top. In this case, all three of them are the same. And then we'll do the last one here with the drag grease. I'll put that on board, put the light one in, and grab the clip that rides in the little groove here. I don't know if you can see the groove, but there's a groove right above the drag stack here that rides all the way around. Find one side of it and plant that in the groove, and just kind of even it out. You can press it down, and I'm not quite set there. This one didn't get in the groove in the back here. All right, now we're back into the grooves. That goes on here. Oh, one more bearing. I didn't oil that one. Let's make sure we put some oil on that. We're going to lock that in. Well, I got grease on everything with this. I guess you didn't run the risk of this one going dry. All right, we'll tighten this down. Make sure that holds, it's holding, and I like to back it off. I don't like to keep these under pressure if you don't need them pressurized. Look at that, what a beautiful reel. So that's the Conflict 6000. It's a nice reel with 5.6 to 1 gear ratio, 41 inches on retrieve, and this one is ready to go fishing again. So I hope you've enjoyed that. If you did, please like it, and if you want to see more of these, please subscribe. And this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for watching.